Hey, thank you, recorder. Hi, I'm Jeremy Bass. I think you know me a little bit. I used to be a member here for quite some time, and I've kind of run off and done my own thing, and now I find myself running back here a little bit. So I've had kind of a rather roundaboutish way of doing a lot of things as of late. And part of the thing that I found really interesting when I was going around my super roundabout way of moving all over the place was I got to travel a lot. And that ability to travel to predominantly Southeast Asia introduced me to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different ideas. And it really kind of challenged me on some of the things that I believe were true, that are not so true, that I think are really important to talk about, that if we want to really grow as a society or as a world, we have to adopt some more of these global perspectives. And so since I grew up as a Christian, and I like some of the values of Christianity, and I like the community of Crossroads that I grew up in. And Peter was like, hey man, you want to talk about some of your travels? I was like, cool. But I also want to do something a little bit different because I think Christianity is a wonderful religion. However, I think it needs pushed a little bit. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Christianity has been under some flack quite a bit from other people for various other reasons. And that's important to talk about. But in this case, I wanted to focus on climate change in ways that are the Christian's perspective on how we handle nature, the environment, our relationship to it. I want to challenge it a little bit. So can you go to the next slide, Sharon? So I have to give a warning, a public service announcement about this presentation. We're going to challenge a lot of Christianity's teachings here. All right. I have to be upfront. I know some people aren't a fan of this. They're like, oh my God, this is going to be heretical. I'm like, okay, maybe a little bit, but I think this is very important because a lot of ideologies that we have about religions kind of have this pedestal of unchallengeability, that they're from God, that they're from the divine, that they're direct transmission from what we believe is true. And while that can be really reassuring at times, there's moments where we got to say like, maybe, is that true? Is that really accurate? And we have to see where are the conflicts with what other religions have said about some of these same topics. So I kind of want to push that envelope a little bit here on some of the fundamental tenets of Christianity and how it relates to earth, to nature, and our relationship to it, so that maybe we can look a little bit broader than just the one worldview that we've been on. The other thing is that we're going to try to see a human influence within Holy Scripture. This is a very controversial thing to say. When you say, that's not what God wrote, that's what humans wrote. That's a very, very upfront, crazy, radical idea. However, I want us to have that idea in the back of our minds going, did humans really have an influence whenever this was written? Is this something maybe a person said and maybe not God said? Just to have the thought in our heads to be a little bit more open to maybe something that could be tweaked a little bit. The next thing we're going to have to point out, very good,
I keep going off of
is we're going to talk about a very scary future. Climate change is something that's very real, that's very forthcoming, that's already been happening, and it's quite worrisome, honestly, with some of the things that we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to try to sound doom and gloomy when I address this, but it's a very important reality that we have to be upfront with, to the degree that there are things that we have to be cognizant of and be ready for change. And we have to observe some lessons from other faiths. This is kind of the main crux of my argument, is that a lot of the reasons why I'm pushing these challenges is because looking at other religions or other philosophies forces you to contemplate what you hold as established truths. And these are really, really, really important things to keep in the back of your head whenever you're thinking about, oh, how do we handle this situation going on right now? What decisions are we going to make about the future? And we have to look at what are other people saying about this? What are other people doing about this? And it's very important to keep that in the back of your head. But maybe most importantly and really fun is that I'll have some cool travel photos. If you're going to take anything away from this presentation, I'll have some cool travel photos. You're like, wow, that was really neat. So you got that to look forward to as well. And so finally, the last thing that I would ask that we do is that we take a deep breath and we'll jump right in and we'll get into this craziness that I'll be starting with. So a little bit about me. I'm Jeremy. That's my name. I aside from you knowing me as the guy who was in Crossroads in the youth group doing all the dinner theaters and mission trips and fun Sunday activities and playing saxophone every once in a while for various congregational things, my background of what I did educationally was I studied a little bit of environmental education. I went to Indiana University, Bloomington, and I was looking to be a teacher in earth and space science. And then I decided, you know what, I kind of wanted to talk about more human topics instead of things about the environment, which I'm still passionate about, but it's not my main interest. So I ended up switching to psychology, and I just graduated last summer with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. And I'm looking at grad schools currently in the United Kingdom to go teach psychology and religion and other more human-centered topics. I traveled to 5 Southeast Asian countries. Those countries were Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. All of those places combined had a big combination of Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and a lot of local indigenous faiths that kind of fused into those mainstream religions there, which is really, really interesting. I also just love learning about different religions. I'm not an expert by any means in anything that I'm going to be talking about right now. It's just kind of my passion. And currently, I'm a mental health counselor. That's my main occupation right now that I'm doing, where I'm working with individuals and trying to help them grow holistically in their development. That's a little bit about me. This picture right up here at the top, this was when I was in Indonesia on Bali. This was a family that I was staying with. And then the bottom photo there was when I was in Thailand. That was my homestay family that I stayed with there. And I was really worried I was just wearing this shirt again, because then I'd have to say a joke that I only wear 2 shirts. But thankfully, I've worn 3 shirts now. This is a step in the right direction. And this is also short hair, Jeremy. As you see, I have lovely locks now. It has changed. So here's the deal about global warming. This is the big challenge that we're facing, which is the impetus of why I'm trying to push Christianity to think a little differently. So the reason why we're hearing this thing about global warming and climate change and all this bad stuff going on to the environment is that for the dawn of civilization, for as long as we have lived, we have had centuries of hunting, fishing, farming, deforestation, pollution, wars, and so much more that add to destroying landscapes and agriculture and areas of our world that cause degradation to the degree that the earth starts warming, pollution gets higher, and animals start dying. And it's not that some of these things are bad. So for instance, hunting gets a lot of bad rap from environmentalists. However, in some areas where there's a lot of really, really high concentrations of predators that are just wiping out ecosystems, hunters are actually really good at mitigating the effects of those predators so that they don't have a monopoly over the ecosystem and kind of cause an issue to occur. So there is an importance there. However, the overhunting and the poaching, that's kind of one of the concerns that is there for why that you have issues of global instability and things that can also lead to climate change. The other thing about global warming that's really important to keep in mind is that for pretty much our entire existence, we've been very unaware to the degree that we've actually been causing serious issues. A lot of people like to say that our ecological destruction started very currently with the Industrial Revolution, where we were building all these big smoke factories and steamships and minings and bombs and explosions to tear up places. But that's not actually true. There's a historian called Yuval Harari who wrote this amazing book called Sapiens. And one of the things he talks about was that in the earliest of years, like 60,000 years ago, when humans first settled on Australia, Australia used to be a fully wooded island. It was a giant place of trees and vegetation and a whole bunch of biodiverse animals living all over the place. Well, here's the deal. When humans walked in and they started coming in, they butchered and slaughtered and mass hunt pretty much most of the wildlife in the area. And it actually helped propagate a lot of the different ecosystems that happened there. And a lot of the biodiversity of Australia kind of died off. And this was 60,000 years ago. This wasn't present day. This was something very, very old. So you see a lot of these old animals that have fossils there that they're like, what happened to them? And part of that was because of human mass hunting and deforestation that cleared out areas that caused those animals to die. So we've been at this for a while. And the other thing is that even in our best attempts to mitigate a problem, we sometimes don't know the consequences. I was at a permaculture farm in Thailand, which I'll tell you about later, where a guy was telling us a case study in England where there were too many feral cats. They were everywhere. They were getting all over the place. They were interrupting the farmland. So they're like, okay, we got to take down the feral cats. So they got some hunters and they shot up the feral cats, but then they realized their cows were dying. And they're like, how does this happen? How does killing cats and trying to get their population down influence the cows? Well, it turns out that when you have a bunch of cats, they're really good at taking out the mice. And when you get rid of the cats, the mice prosper. And when the mice prospered, they would burrow underground and eat ground bees that were having nests in the ground. And when the ground bees died, there wasn't any fertilization for the plants that the cows ate. So this whole chain reaction went completely unnoticed because of one problem that they didn't look at holistically. And this is a very common thread with a lot of environmental policies where they're like, okay, we've got one issue here. This population's too big. This population's too small. We got to fix it. And they go right in, and sure enough, 3 other problems happen because there's a big system going on that we aren't aware of. And this is really hard. And this requires a lot of environmental science. So the point here is that this is one of the first times, I believe, that we can see this more directly. And one of the ways we see that is through this point of no return. The point of no return is a concept in global warming that basically says we are reaching a point where the amount of emissions of pollution and greenhouse gases that are causing the earth to warm up, they are reaching a point that even if we stop the amount of pollution, if we stop the CO2 emissions, it still wouldn't stop the heating of the earth for a more amount of time. And the reason why is because we put out all this air, all these gases, and they stay there. And as long as they stay there, they will continue to absorb more heat and make the earth warmer. So even if we stop it, they're still up there and they're still going to heat the earth continuously. So people have created graphs like this that have basically said, we only have a certain amount of time this way before we have to stop all of our emissions, before we can actually prevent this point of no return and we can actually see the earth cooling. And the fortunate part about today is that we have the ability to calculate all of this stuff. We can see how much we're polluting in the air. We can see how many vegetations are collapsing and the environments are going away. We have the ability to see this now when in the past we didn't. And this is a really good thing. However, we haven't really been active about acting on these concerns. We've got the data. We've been talking about it for years. We've been seeing all these catastrophes going on and that things that might happen. We have the ability to project and figure that out, but we haven't worked on that. And part of the reason why I don't think we've done that is because a lot of our values as Christians or other religions are prohibiting us from really wanting to take that next step to say, you know what, we've got to really help Earth. So here's the thing. How did we get here? How did we get to a point where we have this lovely earth? It's a gift from God. It's one of the holiest things we have to live on, and yet it's really being hurt by us. How did this happen? So I want to point out that there are 3 main things within Christian teachings that really have been problematic for, we'll say, Western worlds who are predominantly Christian, that are propagating this inactivity and danger towards Earth. And those 3 things are anthropocentrism, which we'll get to in a little bit, contradictions in the Christian teachings as well, which make it a little bit difficult to really take action, and demonizing pagan religions. So let's jump right into anthropocentrism. This very long jargony word that I will try to not say again is favoring humans over everything else. So if we look at the big food chain of every organism, every plant, every object in the world, anthropocentrism says humans are the top. They're the cream of the crop. They're the number one guy that no matter what happens, we're the best. And Christianity is pretty upfront about how great humans are as opposed to everything else. So one of the famous lines in Genesis, verse 26 in chapter 1 is, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. We've pretty much been given an endorsement from God to be like, hey man, you do what you want. You can have it all. And that's a very big responsibility to have. That's a very big entitlement, a privilege, to be able to have kind of whatever it is, you're the top dog. And the problem is that there's not a lot of, we'll say, rules, regulations, stipulations when you're given free reign at the top. So the other thing about that is that when you have a statement like that given to you about what it means to be human, it emphasizes that we are most like God. Out of all the creatures there, when you say that you are in God's image, you are given the most relatability to God. You are the reflection. When we hold up God in the mirror, there was a human being on the opposite side because we are in their likeness. And Jesus is the quintessential image of that, the ability of the Word made flesh, because this holy conception of God has had a human manifestation, the ultimate reflection of what God is. And we are very similar to that. So immediately, we're given this very high elitism across all the other species and all the other ecosystems, living and non-living, that are out there. The other thing that's really emphasized as well within this human top dogness is we are allowed to subdue the land and propagate freely. And this idea was brought forth in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. We are encouraged to move throughout the world. We are encouraged to use the earth for our purposes. And the word subdue is used intentionally. Now, for those of you who are Hebrew scholars, you might know that this line here is actually a point of contention, because they will say subdue doesn't necessarily mean capturing, pillaging, raping the earth. It means more just using it to help you out. However, even still, the language is used in a way that kind of reinforces our ability to just use it for our own purposes, first and foremost. And that's the problem, is that of all the other people that use earth, of all the other organisms, of all the persons, we're the ones that are given the most authority. Essentially, this concept is known as a divine mandate. A divine mandate means God has given you an endorsement to do whatever it is. And the endorsement is that we are allowed to do whatever we want. I also really like that graphic because it kind of shows, again, what all the different animals are out there, all the different species. And again, man is on the top. Even though we are of a lesser number than most other species. There's ones that have way bigger populations than we do, and yet we're the top out of everyone. And the other thing is that for all the feminists in the room,
Yeah.
females are still below man. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, you know what?
I've seen that image. I think that is really powerful.
I didn't get the whale until I thought of Jonah in the whale, and that's the only reason why I could think they put whales up there, because what? We hunt whales all the time, but we love dogs. Like it's a weird hierarchy we have of things.
They're trying to make the triangle
I know.
clear.
You got your word.
They needed a long.
So
And the octopus should be up higher.
yes. So the second main thing about Christianity that is really important to be aware of are the contradictions. Now, when you have a book that's 1,000 pages for scholars with the annotations on the bottom, and you're trying to give ideas about what God is and what life is, you might just accidentally contradict yourself, because there's just a lot of material that is being written and talked about, and there's a lot of information out there. So naturally things will sound ambiguous, or they'll be like, hey, you just said that there. Why are you saying this here? And people who have ever read the Old Testament and New Testament might be like, dude, what's this God? Like, he was just wrecking down castles and now he's like, turn the other cheek. What's going on here? So for some people that might be a little bit crazy, and other people are like, that's normal. However, that being said, you have to look at the contradictions anyway and figure out what's the right message, if there is one. The first big contradiction I'd like to say is this question, what is nature? I don't think anyone has a good idea of what nature is. However, I find it very ambiguous in the way Christianity tries to define what nature is. So we know that God created all things, the master creator, best artsman in the world, did all the sculpting, all the uniqueness, put it all together, and we see all the things here because of God. But here's the deal. Humans are also created too by God. Does that also mean that humans are also nature in and of themselves? But the difference is that even though we might say, wow, yeah, we're nature too, we're given this role with an emphasis on stewardship, that we're supposed to till and keep the earth all the time, that we see all of nature around us and we have to kind of work around it, to maneuver it, to adjust it, to fix it, to let it grow, to let it prosper, kind of as if we're separate from us. And this idea of we have this earth to take care of and that it's our responsibility and that we're the top person gives us this sense of this is the world and this is us. There is a very big difference. There's a barrier between who we are and what nature is. And that's really murky when you try to ask, what does it mean to be human as well? So this idea of nature in Christianity is a little bit murky and a little bit convoluted because of the way that it kind of puts us in a bit of I thou, or a in group out group, or this is you, this is me. The other thing that's very, very difficult and is debated widely amongst Christian scholars and pastors and religious leaders is nature sacred? This is a very difficult debate that many people of the different denominations of Christianity get to. So the Bible repeatedly mentions to worship only God. The only thing that's worthy of praise, that's only worthy of worship, is God, first and foremost, nothing else. But nature is seen as a creation. It's not the creator. So nature doesn't do the creating. God does the creating. All the things of nature are just the manifestations of God. God did it, put them out there. They're all things that he did, so praise God. And in addition to that, nature is seen as a gift. It's not kind of a relationship. It's not something we are. Nature is a gift. It was something given to us. Earth was a gift. We received it. Now, I don't know what you've done with all your gifts in your life, but I've returned some to Target. And I think sometimes we take this Target return policy to Earth pretty seriously, because with a gift, it's kind of just something that's just given to you, and it's nice and you appreciate it and it's cool and we like it and we want to be respectful to the person that gave it to us and say, yes, thank you for giving us that gift. But it's not something of devotion. And this is an interesting part, because if nature includes God's image, does something possessing God's image also become worthy of praise, care, and devotion? And Jesus is a really interesting analogy to this, because Jesus is God's image. He was a manifestation of God, which would then mean also nature. That's also part of the natural manifestation. And if nature encompasses all the things around us, all the things that are there, I think we would encompass that as well. And I think Jesus would encompass that as well. And so we worship Jesus and we worship the Holy Spirit and we worship God, but we don't worship the earth, even though it was also created in the same way. And that's a very, very difficult line to walk that most people don't talk about, to say that there is this difference between worshiping Jesus versus the world, when both of them involve the creation process to be made in and of themselves. So
Mother Nature.
exactly. And that's something that is somewhat alluded to and sometimes not. And some people use the mother image in different faiths more than others. But in Christianity, it mostly talks about Father, as in the creator being the only person there. And nature, again, is just all the other tools and creatures and things that God just made. So again, you go back to God all the time, but then Jesus is this weird anomaly, because Jesus was a creation of God and we worship Jesus. But of all the other creations out there, that's the only one that we choose. And it's a very interesting tightrope to walk. So in addition to that, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with nature? Like, what's our responsibility? We've been given this earth and this land? What are we going to do with it? And again, this is also a very interesting debate. So originally, when early editions of the Bible came out, the wording in Genesis in chapter 2:15 was to till and to keep. That whenever we have this land in front of us, we are to till it and to keep it. The problem with that language is that those are two contradictory things. When you till something, you go in, you're very active, you get it done, you have to adjust it, you have to correct it. There's problems with it. We have to fix it. We get involved for our benefit so that we can plant the crops. To keep means you just let it do what it does. You just let it go. You don't adjust it. You let it run its course. The cycles of Earth just continue running and running and running, and you try not to interfere. It's non-interference. But when you're asked to do both of those things at the same time, you're kind of like, what are we going to do here? These are two different things. So newer editions of the Bible will say care and protect instead, which kind of gives this idea of trying to have this inactive protective approach and looking out for the best interest, but it doesn't necessarily address how active or passive we must be. Do all of our inventions and gadgets and things to make our lives better, to improve the well-being of the earth, are we trying to do we try to put those out there and be very active and upfront, or do we kind of minimize our activity, minimize our things that we use, our comforts, our technologies, and just kind of go to a more simpler life? It's a very difficult thing to talk about and isn't really overly clear. The other thing that's very difficult when talking about this is that Christians are encouraged repeatedly to spread the news far and wide along with the good news. We're supposed to propagate, we're to expand, we're supposed to spread the word of God. We're trying to put the Garden of Eden everywhere as possible. That's very, very, very active. And in some cases, that's very, very, very invasive. Because for some people, they'll be like, why are you forcing your ideas upon me? Let me do my thing. So that's a very difficult conversation when you have a culture that wants its own way of life, its own way of living. And we're like, Jesus, 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 Jesus. It's like, whoa, 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 hold down. Slow down a little bit. That can be very, very difficult for many people to work with. So we don't really know how intrusive of God's gift we get to become, how much we actively take from the land versus kind of let it do its thing. It's very difficult to have an idea of what's appropriate. And finally, this idea of living in harmony with nature. When we read the book of Job and Job starts talking to, or God starts talking to Job about, I'm the person who built the mountains, who lets the hawks fly, who has this big analogies of all these different things God does to make the earth run. You get this sense of power and awe in the fact that God's running the show. He's put forth all these creations, he's done all these things, and he's really, really, really having a control, a sense of autonomy over making the earth run, and that it's all in God's hands, essentially. And to kind of question the power of God causes him to go like, hey, Job, you better listen to me, brother, and kind of get really, really upfront about, this is a very powerful person that you're talking to. Let me do my thing. Do not question my decisions. However, on the other hand, we have this idea of revelations happening where the world just blows to bits, and we're going to have a new earth that comes afterwards that will be lovely and pleasant and good. And so how do we wrestle with that? If we have this very powerful God that's going to have all these controls, is in charge of a lot of things that we live with, yet on the same time, we're going to have an apocalypse that results in a whole bunch of changes and a new earth. What's the point of even caring about an earth if we're just going to get a new one later? So that's a very interesting point to raise when you're wondering, like, do we even try to do these climate policies when at the end of the day, sometime down the road, something new is going to happen anyways? So what's the point of even trying to settle into what Earth is right now and just let it live in harmony? Or do we take that approach of like, even though he's got a handle on it, we run in and we intrude because it's just going to blow up anyway, so might as well just reap the benefits right now. So it's very, very difficult with this concept of harmony. And so finally, and this is perhaps the most surprising of them, is the demonizing of the pagans. If any of you want a really amazing article read, I highly, highly recommend this article written by Lynn White Jr. called The Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. White was a historian who in 1967 went to a conference and talked about how he said, and this is a very, very, I don't know if I support this view, but he said Christianity is the most damaging ecological philosophy out there. And I was like, okay, provocative, interesting, nice, very uplifting. what you got to say about that? But he made a lot of points, but the points that are unique to here was that Christianity actively worked to put down indigenous faiths. The way that the Bible is worded about different religions is very, very negative, to the point that they are seen as evil and corrupt. So to give you a couple examples of this, in Romans, God is said to say they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than creator. And additionally, later on said that these individuals were filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. And the only way to get them to fix their errors was conversion or elimination, because they were so decrepit, so polluted, so evil, so not truth to what God is, that they needed changed now. They needed saved now. And unfortunately, that translates into mass annihilation. It translates into we wipe your history out because ours is the truth. It's the right way. And that, unfortunately, led to the constant labeling of idolatry, which undermines every single animistic nature-based faith. When you go and look at different faiths like Wiccanism, Druidism, Egyptian faiths, early Greek mythologies, Native Americans, Aborigines, Yoruba, a lot of African tribes, they're all animistic. They all use idols, and that's not a bad thing. It's really, really beautiful. And the reason why it's beautiful is because it is something that they use to direct their faith. One of the things that I found really inspiring was I talked to a Hindu, and he said, I couldn't get into Christianity because the idea of God is too abstract for me. I need something to direct my energies. And that's why he likes statues. That's why he likes pictures, because it is something that's very present, very there, that I can direct my intention and my energies to. And unfortunately, Christianity didn't see that. Yes, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Nobody wants to say that the cross is an idol, but it is, and that's not a bad thing. Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
Killing somebody. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's highly hypocritical. It really is, because the cross is an icon. It's an idol, and that's not a bad thing. It's totally beautiful because the cross has a story to it. It has a reminder, and we pray to it. We have a giant one hanging in the congregation right there. So that's totally fine. The problem is that when you use that argument to wipe out people and to say that they're evil and corrupt and that they're so different and exotic, yeah, and that's very problematic. And so the way that this was encouraged was through missionaries, and that word missionary, to carry the mission, is used repeatedly throughout the Bible. But the mission is to mass convert, and it's not for collaboration. And that's the problem. So this whole problem with demonizing the pagans had so many repercussions for how we conceptualize nature and God. So here's what happened. We had forced religious conversions, which means that people were having to strip away their lives, their culture, their traditions, their beliefs, and adopt something new that they didn't really like, but they had to do it to survive. Additionally, whole traditions were destroyed. You had entire faiths, entire traditions that we just don't know about because we don't have any records of them. They were annihilated. A very small tribe of people who were very insular, that didn't talk with many people, we may never, ever, ever know about that because of the missionary zeal that tried to mass convert and wipe out such non-believers. The other thing that was very interesting is that we've drained the use of this sort of verbiage drains the spirituality of nature. The reason why idol worshipers were so interesting was that they had a conception of God that was embedded in nature. Every single aspect of nature had a God. I think the Greek religion is a really great example of that, because you have one of wine, you have one of fertility, you have one of war, you have one of the oceans, you have one of the sky, lightning. You have a whole pantheon dedicated to each and every element. So whenever you walk in nature, when you see a tree, you're reminded of something sacred. You're reminded of something holy. Native American religions like to say that ancestor spirits reside in various parts of their community. So this tree over here might have been someone's grandfather. This section of ground over here might house several parents of way earlier generations. So there was a sense of personhood and a sense of connection to people, of those you can take lessons from around you. And unfortunately, Christianity does not have that level of personhood, of spirituality within all the other elements around there. Additionally, this is an interesting one. Nature-based rituals were removed. A lot of animistic faiths will do rituals, chants, songs, dances, ceremonies that are designed to commune with nature, that are designed to get in touch with those spirits, to draw reverence, to give thanks. And Christianity does not have that same level of devotion. And additionally, many indigenous cultures use those rituals daily, intentionally, in every single outing. So to give a really great example of this, whenever, I'm forgetting the name of the tribe, there's a Native American tribe that whenever a deer is killed or accidentally killed, they have a pouch of tobacco. And they run up and they put the tobacco under the deer's nose, and they send a prayer to the Great Spirit Mother to escort the spirit of this deer back to safety. And that is every single time they do that, whether they were there for the killing or not. It's their responsibility to help with the escort of this spirit. There is a sense of love and connectedness every single time, and that is done every single time. That is a ritual. And unfortunately, some of those rituals were squashed in favor of just worshiping God only. The other thing that's really interesting here that most people don't think about is animistic religions have a concept of circular time, meaning something that happens here is the result of something that happened in the past, will affect something that happened in the past, and will also affect something in the future. They are constantly thinking about this cycle of things that happened before, after, will occur, why we're happening right now, and they normally connect that to nature, because nature is a very cyclical process. They talk about seasons a lot. They talk about the ways that animals will change and adjust to the seasons. They talk about the ways water will flow differently. And all of this is connected to time and this process of repeating things over and over and over again. And so what that means is that when you intrude in that circle, you disrupt the time, you disrupt the cycle. And animistic religions are very, very, very acute to those circular moments, while Christianity is more focused on progressing forward. Again, that propagating throughout Eden, that idea of expanding and moving forward, the concept of time is very linear. They wanted to progress, while animistic religions take a more getting into the cycle, a circular approach. And that's a very big conceptual difference on how you relate to nature. And basically what this translates to is Christian essentialism. At the end of the day, Christianity is the best. It's the only thing that's worthwhile. No other religion is compatible. No other religion is appropriate. And that's really mean. And that's just, yeah, there's no harmony in that. It's not cool. And it also makes no sense, because if Christianity was that great, why do we have thousands of other faiths out there that people could choose from that are also very popular and have really great results for well-being? But here's the big kicker. This sort of demonizing pagan religions that focus extensively on nature helps reinforce a separateness from nature. When you constantly go and try to tear down faiths that have a different mindset, and in this case, it's harmony with nature, you reinforce we're different from that. And unfortunately, that different from that means we do not look at nature the same way you do. We look at it as just God only. And unfortunately, that reinforces the ideas of either nature is a resource, we're not really that responsible for it, we're meant to just expand, it's not really holy, it's not worthy of worship. All these other complications that we just talked about, they help create the separateness. And it helps create in our minds, consciously or unconsciously, the idea of separateness. I like this picture a lot because this is the problem. We love this. I have to admit, this is a very aesthetically pleasing thing to be able to just drive under a tree. I can't tell you how horrible this is for a tree. This is terrible. This is just lost about 200 years of its life because we had the idea of, oh, we want to have this walkway. There's a tree in the way. Instead of going around the tree, we're going to go right through it instead. And so we like it. It's beautiful. Yeah, exactly. So we love it. It's beautiful. It's nice. It's pretty. We like the idea of walking through.
Great photo op.
It's a great photo op, but it really kills the tree. It really hurts them. And we have a lot of examples of this where our love for beauty, of progress, of stuff that we enjoy really undermines the privileges of other species. And one of them includes trees. So, and it's also very linear because there's a path that they want to go, that they want to get through, and they will stop at nothing to get to that destination. Yeah. Yeah. So it's, yeah.
Well,
So next-
trees like that anyway.
Yeah.
Where they've been eroded through.
So another little thing I'll put in here is the creationism problem. Now, creationism as a concept is not bad because it says that every single thing that was out there is unique, which to an extent is pretty true. Like there are no two things that are alike. Everything has a unique identity. The only issue with creationism is that it implies a fixed special intention of who we are. And this idea of fixedness, that we are so special, so unmovingly unique, is reinforced throughout the entire collection of verses stating our unique relationship to God. If you read the Bible, it's very interesting how often you will see verses that talk about our relationship to God, who God is, what we do with God, but it doesn't talk about that as much related to other animals or our responsibility to other animals. Yeah, we have stories like Noah, or yeah, we have stories like Job, where God's talking about how I create all the animals and have them do their things. But it doesn't necessarily talk about, you know, what's the squirrel's path to divinity? Well, how does an octopus reach heaven? And that may sound silly, but the end result is that the way we are specially created in God's image and that we are this unique, stable species reinforces a distance between us and the rest of the natural world. And at the extreme end, this creationism idea denies the research we have on evolution. And I'm not going to harp on the fact that of what evolution is and try to argue that it is true. All I can just say is that we have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of research papers out there talking about the ways that all of the animals and species have evolved from a common ancestor, spreading out, branching, and we see elements with bones, cellular structure, metabolism rates that are borrowed from all these other species, which reinforces our connectivity to all of them. Creationism, with the idea of you are unique and fixed, kind of denies this idea of evolved connectivity between other species. And the more time that we spend trying to talk about our created existence, our unique existence, the less time we spend on all the other aspects of creation. It's really good that we try to become better people, that we try to get to heaven if you are interested in that, or living the Christian life, trying to live Jesus's ideas. These are all really great. But when you spend the vast majority of your time absorbed in that, that is time not spent on looking at your environment, on looking at other cultures, of looking at different animals and what we do for them. And that's one of the big kickers with creationism, is that if we're uniquely created and we spend so much time on it, we're not really focusing on all the other things that were also created and what makes them special, because that's empathy and that's compassion. And those are really important attributes to cultivate as a human being, let alone a Christian. So I propose that we need a new relationship with nature. Christianity has some good things going for it, which I will get to soon, but it also has some things that need some changing. And I would like to propose some of those new things. Ultimately, this is a relationship issue. Yes, we have systemic ecological issues, economic issues, political issues, but at the core of it, the relationship, the qualities of how I believe nature is, who I am with it, my responsibilities to it, the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that I do, that relationship, that's the problem. That's the thing that needs overhauled. And all of our actions are based upon how we relate to the things about it. The way we have a relationship will influence the degree that we choose to act, not act, feel, think, engage, get with other people, collaborate. All these things stem from what sort of relationship do we want to cultivate for this person, individual, whatever it may be. And I'd like to see some other religions and philosophers that stress this relationship differently, because they've got a lot of interesting ideas that I think Christianity should borrow that I think are pretty worthwhile. So let's take a look at some of them. So Hinduism. Picture here is a really interesting photo of a Hindu temple in Bali. This is actually like a normal structure you would see to each person's house, which is crazy to think about. This is a temple, but this central layout is pretty similar to like every single house that you see, which is kind of remarkable. And I don't know if you can see it, but these guys right here, they're two monkeys. You already have a little bit of animal representation right there. But here's the deal about Hinduism. Everything comes from Brahma, the cosmic energy. And the thing about this is that this cosmic energy is within every single one of us. So I'm God, you're God, that table's God, the lamp outside's God, the grass is God, the clouds are God, everything is God, and everything is holy, and everything is worthy of devotion. They're very, very intentional about recognizing the divinity within everything and telling people to remember that and to have icons worshiping every single thing in their environment. And so in order to do that, they use extensive use of rituals celebrating these various elements. So for instance, Hinduism loves fire ceremonies. There's a whole celebration where they have a fire pot and they draw the fire energy. It's called Agni, and they use the fire as a conduit to help them become closer with nature, to get better ideals of being a better person, offering prayers, normally involving ancestors that are used within the fire or within the area around them. So they actively use elements of nature as a means to become closer with their connectedness with their environment, but also become better people. And additionally, Hinduism uses so many statues, symbols, and other icons to direct their energy, which I talked about earlier. They're very adamant about having something visual that I can go to directly. Yeah.
They're the ones that do namaste, right?
Yes, that is kind of their.
I found that so powerful for me anyway. We have a peace pole now in our park. I don't know if you've heard.
No, I haven't.
The Rotary Club put a peace pole, and they have the names of peace be with you in 39 different languages. But at that ceremony, the gentleman, I met him personally, and he did the namaste to me, and he said, "Do you know what that means?" He says, "This is the divine in you, the divine in me."
Mm-hmm.
Namaste.
Yes.
I was so excited about that, and we actually did it here at church.
Yeah.
I called the pastor and I said, we're in conflict, this will bring us together. We did it once, which was nice. I mean, she heard me, but didn't, anyway.
Yes.
But that is so powerful for me.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful, empathic. Yeah, it's very relational.
We should do that for a passing of the peace.
I totally agree. It's a lovely term. I do admit it's a little cliche now because it's so commercialized. It really frustrates me because it's so beautiful.
No, it is.
Um,
And that's a good reason to still do it.
Yeah.
But I haven't felt comfortable doing it. And I should, at the end of our, well, anyway, I'll talk to you later.
no, it's good. It's good. But yeah, that's a wonderful example of, again, yeah, because they are actively trying to recognize where is God in my life right now, very directly, and looking at all the different ways that I can connect with God in my immediate environment. So another cool thing about this is that every single god in Hinduism has an appearance, a story, and a corresponding element of nature. Every single god has this. So for instance, these are two statues of things I captured in a place called Batu Caves. Batu Caves is a huge Hindu worship center in Malaysia, just north of the city of Kuala Lumpur. And they have a very, very, very big temple inside the caves. And you have two gods here, one of which is Hanuman. He is a monkey king. And there's a whole story in the religious text called oh my God, I'm going to No, I'm butchering the name. Never mind. I'm just going to forget it because I'm going to mispronounce it. Anyways, I'll get it to you later because I can't English today. But he has this whole story of helping various people along the story to get to their destination. So you have many instances of him fighting people, giving advice, rescuing a princess, getting captured. This whole epic becomes associated with this one guy. And as soon as you see him, you're reminded of all those stories, kind of like Jesus, but the difference is now multiply Jesus by like 500 and you get Hinduism. You have an entire epic of all these different characters with faces, and there's an animal associated with it. Morrigan, which is the big golden statue over there, he's the god of war, but he's also worshipped for feasts and harvest, and his mount is a peacock. So you're reminded of an animal every single time you see these different creatures or different gods. So they are intentionally recognizing every single aspect of life, which is really, really cool. Indigenous Americans, I've talked about them a little bit. I'll go through a little bit quickly. They're highly ritualistic. They do so many different things where they will worship all these different aspects of life. The picture I have over there is the Pueblo Indians. The Pueblo Indians do a corn dance where they will dance in full regalia and try to worship the god of rain and the god of corn to bring prosperity and harvest for their next crop growing. So they have this whole routine celebrated of the soil, of the water, of corn, of crops, everything done intentionally to give a connection to nature in a much more real, embodied way. And there are just numerous other aspects of how they've done this throughout life. They're actually, Native Americans are really interesting because they're very politically active. They will argue for personhood for a lot of their natural monuments. So when they notice that someone's polluting a river, they will petition Congress to make that river viewed as a person so that people stop polluting it, because to them, it is a person. There have been ancestors that have put their spirits into the water. There are guardian spirits that are within the different animals and the rocks that are within that river. There's a lot of people and a lot of life, and they want to respect that, which is really, really important. And to them, all of Earth is a parent. Every single part of Earth teaches Indians lesson or Native Americans lessons. They are there to help guide humanity, and they have many lessons and stories to share that are very, very important. And they are also big on cyclical time. So, which means they don't want to intrude on anything because they do not just want to disrupt any sort of balance. Deep ecology, I won't go too deep into this one. Basically, deep ecology is a very interesting philosophical tradition that is trying to say that at the end of the day, there's an interrelatedness between everything, and that humans need to identify with nature. These are the core aspects of what they try to say, and they are big pushers of environmental philosophy and environmental policies. So normally what happens is that a lot of people who get into deep ecology are like ex-Exxon workers or big oil drillers or environmental scientists. People who are in science fields end up adopting this philosophy as a means of trying to get more connected with Earth and to try to stop using policies that are very invasive. And so their main crux is that we are not the most important species, and things like the Renaissance era, which normally talked about getting everything, we're amazing, progress, manifest destiny. They're like, no, don't do that. They're very rejecting of that to try to push more egalitarian sharing within nature. And now I'd like to show you some cool pictures because I have a collection of cool pictures. So this guy here is a lovely tree in Bali. I saw a lot of these in Thailand as well, where people will put a scarf around a tree to protect it from deforestation. A lot of the issues within Southeast Asia is deforestation, and people who want to farm will clear out vast amounts of land, and they will slash and burn agriculture, try to get the ground fertile to plant crops. But unfortunately, some of those trees are just a little bit too important to try to cut down. So Buddhists will put scarves, or Hindus will put scarves around to say, you cannot cut down this tree because it is holy, it is sacred, we worship here, and it needs to be protected. And so these are some of the ways that they will do that to try to stop people from cutting down trees, because they recognize its importance to the environment, to their livelihood, but also their spiritual development.
Does the government accept
Complicated story, I'll tell you at the break. Yeah. Next slide, thanks. Taipusam. This is a really cool festival celebrated in India and other Hindu populations. It is a celebration of the harvest where they will get out a whole bunch of food and they will escort and parade all around the city blocks where people are giving out free food to people from other temples around. So I was in Malaysia when this happened, when I was at Batu Caves. This was all around Malaysia. So all these people were gathering around celebrating nature for its ability to give a good harvest. And the way they do that is to go on a pilgrimage to pray to the gods and to worship for the harvest and give thanks for all the food. And they will normally give out food to all the people there as an expression of thanks. So these were me kind of like exploring and going around. And they also have a cool chariot. They escort this chariot around that you get to see. And they put neon lights on, and you have these two really, admittedly, fat yogis that are just throwing out confetti at people and flowers. It was really interesting to see. But yeah, they got a cool little chariot that they escort.
Was it pulled by horses?
It was escorted by people. They were carrying that. Yeah.
Oh.
So another cool celebration is Tumpek Landep. This is a Balinese Hindu holiday known as the celebration of metals. So we like to talk about, we've been talking about nature and plants and trees. They're like, let's celebrate metals. So originally, before cars and refrigerators were there, they would give offerings and devotions for things like swords, axes, building sidings, blacksmith anvils, all these old things they would give offerings to. But now they will put little offerings and incense and scarves on cars, on motorcycles, on refrigerators, on computers. They will actively put little prayer vigils on all these inanimate things because they want to show gratitude for how much they help them. So,
Rug or a mosaic in front of the car on the right?
oh, right here.
It looks like tile.
So that's a little prayer offering. What they'll do is that they'll put like a bunch of little like flowers in a box, and then they'll light incense in the box.
But I think she means the big
Round.
thing.
This-
Is it a mosaic?
That's
or is it-
tile.
That's a mosaic in the parking lot.
Parking lot.
Yeah,
Oh my
See one
gosh.
on the other side.
yeah, that's
Oh,
the same
okay, yeah,
thing.
Wow, wow.
So it's pretty. So another cool thing is permaculture. Permaculture is an idea of farming that really has its origins with indigenous farmers in Mesopotamia. However, it's been expanded to kind of more modern day endeavors. And essentially the idea of permaculture is let nature do its thing, plant only what you need, don't be invasive. So one of the interesting things here is that there's like 7 different species of plants that are dispersed through here. And the reason why is so you don't use pesticide. If you put a bunch of different plants in here that some people are like, ugh, I don't like that, or ugh, I don't like that, it wards off predators and you don't need to put the pesticides there because the interspersing of all those different plants will prevent some species from going in entirely because even though they want to get to the one they like, there's all these other ones around it that's not good. And all the building designs are intentionally minimalistic. This guy recycled a bottle, like a water bottle, so that it's a sprayer. So instead of making this big new sprayer, he put a bottle on top, punched some holes into it, and it's spraying water everywhere. And this is a water well, but it's not exactly like something that needs to be incredibly sophisticatedly crafted. It's very minimalistic. And he put this in a place that was very far away, that wouldn't be kind of like digging up a lot of land. The intention was to try to preserve the ground as much as possible because they realized that if you till and dig up land, you actually destroy a lot of the biolife beneath it. So all this fungi and bacteria that's within the ground, whenever you till it, you actually disrupt it a lot and it makes it harder to grow crops in the long run. In the short run, it works, but in the long run, it's actually not that good. So they try to not disturb it as much as possible. And they don't use mulch because they're like, just use leaves. Leaves is a good mulch or fertilizer or compost. So all of this here is a bunch of dead leaves and brush that have fallen around the area that they gathered and put on top. So they aren't buying this very expensive mulch that gets reprocessed every single year. So they're very, very minimalistic in approach of how they try to create a lifestyle around them. And it's fully self-sufficient. They really don't buy anything outside ever at a permaculture farm. They're trying to grow everything in-house, which is really cool. And this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. This is the permaculture farm. This is the slash and burn agriculture farm. On the one side, you see a set that's trying to maintain the biodiversity of the environment. And on the other hand, you have people that normally try to tame it, adjust it, and they normally cut everything down, burn it as a style that's very invasive. And you can see that one looks way more aesthetically pleasing than the other one because it's minimalistic and it's not intrusive. It's trying to keep the system as intact as possible and to minimize our output of what we need. Permaculture life is intentionally trying to be simplistic and minimize all of our luxuries. And in the long run, that seems to help in terms of keeping biodiversity because you don't extract as much energy that way. But here's the deal, Christianity's got an amazing icon, and that's St. Francis of Assisi. He's an interesting character if you don't know him. He was a cloth merchant turned war veteran turned monk. He had an interesting livelihood, to say the least. But after his time as a monk, he started preaching to animals. He would go off and give his sermons to all these birds and bees and creatures all around. And he has several stories of trying to communicate with animals. So for instance, there was a wolf that was attacking a villager, and he walks in and he tells the wolf to stop attacking the villager for food and then feeds the wolf. So whether these stories are true or not isn't the point. The point is that he has been an icon that repeatedly tries to have communion with nature. Even though it's wild, even though it fights, even though there's conflict, he is always at the forefront trying to bring as much peace and prosperity in everything that he does. So all of life to him were his brothers and sisters, and he actively tried to make sure that the livelihood that I'm living is as coherent to respecting all of creation around me as if they were my immediate family member. So at the end of the day, if Christianity is to create a new relationship with nature, it has to do a couple things. It has to have holistic thinking, which means of the totality of everything out there in nature, we have to look at where we sit. We have to look at where we belong and where everyone else is around us. And that's very, very difficult, admittedly, but it's very, very important because that is the pinnacle of compassion, is to realize all the things around us that we have immediate influence with and the ways that we can create change intentionally or unintentionally, and to be mindful of those other perspectives, which also ties into this idea of pluralism. We have many different faiths and many different religions out there that all have different views, as well as different lives and people and cultures and creatures and plants and animals and ecosystems. We cannot thrive, we cannot evolve, we cannot become better unless we incorporate those perspectives. We cannot expect to solve climate change. We can't expect to become better people if we don't actively try to understand the other. And I use that in quotes because it's not really the other, because that again implies separateness. It's all of us in the same boat, and we have to really see what other people are needing from life, even if they can't express it themselves. So all those animals and plants that don't have the ability to speak, you have to see their perspectives as well and how they're hurting, which is more nonverbal and requires our immediate attention, or else we will continue running over them or drilling holes through trees. This is a tough one, but minimalism. The reason why I say that is because the current lifestyle that we live is very, 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 very resource taxing. We take a lot from nature all the time. And that's why we have all this pollution going up in the sky. What we need to do is to live a way more minimalistic life, which requires a lot of different changes. That could be changing the food you eat. So for instance, I'm vegan. I've reduced the amount of food that I eat of meat entirely in animal products because of the whole systemic issues which go on with eating animals and eating meat and the huge degradation that happens. I try to use reusables all the time because all that constant putting out of plastics and single-use items, that all helps degrade the environment further because it's a very costly, expensive things. And some of these require many more drastic things like the ways of the cars that we use, the transportations that we use, the way we grow our food, things that are outside of our control right now, admittedly. But unfortunately, the reality is that the American Western lifestyle, as well as some other lifestyles in other parts of the world, are so resource taxing that it doesn't matter what sort of relationship we have, we can't keep doing it if we expect changes in our environment. We can't expect CO2 levels to drop if we don't reduce some of our activities to some extent, because we're just taking too much all the time to try to get us all the things that we want right now. And the last thing, perhaps and most importantly, is an expansive love. You have to have a love that looks beyond yourself or your immediate family or your immediate species, i.e. human beings. You have to have a love that goes way more radically and beyond to try to see where can I connect with other things that may or may not have that same capacity to love in the way that I do. And that's very radical. It's very unheard of. It's not common. It's not something people like to say, admittedly, but it's needed if we actually want to be able to change our life and to not suffer repercussions and to actually improve our relationship to Earth in a way that's important. So yeah, that's kind of my talk today. I hope you enjoyed it. I went way over. I'm so sorry, but hope you enjoyed it. So thank you for listening to my rambling.
Are there specific questions that you would like to put to Jeremy, or reactions, comments, whatever?
I'm gonna sit down while that happens too, if that's okay. I've been standing for a while. I'm sweating.
I would just love for him to be able to share that with the youth, to check with them and see if you could talk to the youth. You know, I don't know, if they're still meeting or whatever, but I think that it's really wonderful.
Thanks. I'd be open to that if they are.
I
But
have a
it's-
book called The Ice Ages, which I'll give your father on Tuesday, and he'll give it to you.
Oh, cool.
And we're reading a book called Saving Jesus from the Church, our social justice group.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's good. Yeah, I'm on board with everything you said.
Nice. Thanks.
How do we overcome tribalism?
Yeah, that's
Expansive love.
yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, that's one of the universal issues.
it is. You're absolutely right. And
We degenerate into these little tribes, and it seems to me society is degenerating more and more into subgroups.
yeah, and that's, I'm not an expert in peace consolidation or kind of, really, I'm not an expert in anything really. I just read a lot. I'm opinionated, but all I can say is that this concept of I am this fixated individual identity, that this is who I am, is one of the most carcinogenic beliefs anyone can hold, because you cannot believe that you are so uniquely this that nobody else can be you, or that you cannot be someone else. It's truly, part of it is an identity issue. We have this identity that we're very unique, we're very special, this is who we are, and we're socialized to be that. And it's not in not a bad way, because it's like, it's anything. If you grow up as a Christian, people are going to say how wonderful it is to be a Christian, which there's some great things there. There's some great teachings there. Of course, you want to be prideful of those things. What not everyone says, though, is that we don't have all the answers, or that our way isn't the only way, or that we all have different ideas that are
The
really.
Bible says it is, but that's all right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the concerning issues you have to be upfront with, is dogmatism. At the end of the day, we appeal to dogmatism because it's simplistic. It's very easy to get captured into that.
Well, you pointed out the loss of ecology in Australia. That happened in North America.
Yeah.
Because we wiped out all of the mammoth elephants and the saber-toothed tigers and all of those
Yeah.
animals that occurred at the end of the Ice Age. They were all wiped out by the advancing immigrants.
Well, the deforestation in Africa.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or Brazil.
Yeah.
So that's going on now, but
Mhm.
Way back.
we have a long history of overusing
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah, it's really difficult. There was a wonderful TED Talk I watched called Radical Love by Valerie Kaur, I believe. And she talks about this concept of trying to look at love beyond the bounds of your kind of limited use of love. And kind of the example that she gave was that she's a Sikh. And if you're unfamiliar with the Sikh faith, it's one that propagated in, let's see, northeastern India around, oh gosh, what was the origin of Sikh faith? Gosh, I'm really embarrassed now. Anyways, they have had a very rough history of persecution where they have been repeatedly ousted by people in India and surrounding areas. And so they've adopted this really interesting warrior identity as a means of protection. And that's kind of their image that they use as being a warrior in their faith. But in any case, her family is Sikh and was talking about how after 9/11, one of her family friends was murdered at a gas station because the person thought he was Muslim, which again was also ridiculous, but was trying to get angry at a Muslim for their faith of wanting to take down 9/11 towers. So basically what happened was that this guy was sent to jail and the family brother called the guy from jail, just trying to say like, hey, like, why'd you do it? And basically forgave him on the spot. And it's that level of trying to seek the compassion and love of people that we would see as most villainous. That is hard, admittedly. But that level of I'm going to pour that love out everywhere all the time and try to give it to people is incredibly hard. But that's the baseline attitude that's needed. That's the minimal level if you really want to see those changes.
And the mental health crisis in our country is related to,
Yeah.
you know, the fact that everyone thinks that their way of thinking is the best.
Well,
If
it's
it's distorted.
tribalism. I
Yeah.
believe that it's
Right, yeah,
tribalism.
but it.
I mean,
I
the
see it as a
18-year-old
mental-
kid that just killed 10 people.
Yes, oh my heavens.
Yeah.
In your travels in Southeast Asia, did you find that they is sort of universal?
It's a universal thing. Yeah, I don't know any culture right now that really has a truly pluralistic mindset. What I will say that I found interesting was when I was in Bali and I was living with the family I was staying with, I would go to some local ceremonies and festivals, and I was treated much more receptively than other places I've been to, which I found really interesting because normally there's a pattern with highly homogenous groups where they have the same ideology, the same mindset, that they're very closed in. They're very to themselves because they have a very strong identity for their group. And so when an outsider like myself comes in, they're like, you're different, you're weird. I didn't get that same level of hesitancy. Now, granted, this was just my experience. I'm sure other people did as well. But I didn't get that same level of push offness, we'll say. But normally when you have a very strong centralized identity, which normally happens in more tribal cultures, they become very acutely aware of outsiders and don't normally take that very well because they like their culture so much, and I don't blame them for that. It's just much harder to reach that mold. The interesting caveat to that is that let's take the United States culture, which is very pluralistic, and I would argue much less homogenous in terms of a central cultural identity, of something that we really hold on to, because we don't have the same level of rituals and community that other tribalistic areas have. So the interesting thing about societies like the United States is that in some respects, we're not as, I say that now, but we really have been awful towards people like Muslims or South Americans. We have an interesting like fluidity with outgroups, people that are different than us, because we don't have something as much as centralized as a cultural identity, but we don't have an in-group, which means we don't have something that we really attach ourselves to as strongly or as heavily as, say, the Tamil people of India or the Balinese people.
We have multiple in-groups.
Yes.
Well, and it's proud to be an American, you know, I mean, this whole thing.
Yeah, but I would argue
But, yeah.
it's not as unified.
No,
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
No.
and when someone becomes an American, I mean, I went to a
Naturalization.
naturalization ceremony recently, welcoming a South Sudanese young man
Oh, cool.
in the United States. Yeah, I could go on. I'll talk to you about it later. But I mean, it was like, oh, wow. And my son-in-law was welcomed into the United States. He became a citizen from Nicaragua.
Oh, nice. Cool.
I was sad. He didn't want us to go. You know, when my daughter said there was happening, I want to go, I want to go. No, you know, he didn't want it. And my daughter came out of that ceremony just livid because she said the judge pointed directly at people and said, you're no longer Nicaraguan. You're no longer, you are an American. You know, you have to denounce the rest. And well, yeah, my daughter was just furious. And this is in DC. So, I mean, everyone that was in that room was from other countries, you know what I mean? And he can have dual citizenship too. I mean, he can be Nicaraguan and an American, but the ceremony that I went to recently started out with a nice welcoming of cultures. The person that did the ceremony, you know, said, you know, do not lose your cultures
Yeah.
and so forth. But then went on with the oath where you are an American and you pledge allegiance and this is it. It was very interesting, but
No, yeah, and that's,
the world view is so important.
yeah.
And the fact
it's-
that you have traveled. makes a
Yeah,
difference.
there's an idea that's been talked about a lot. It's kind of like pluralism, but it's called cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism is the idea that we're creating societies that intentionally have lots of different people from parts of the world that communicate, that live together, that share ideas, that your policies and your infrastructure and your government is based on the idea of very differing viewpoints. So like one of the examples of a cosmopolitan, well, in theory, trying to be cosmopolitan is London. London's a very, very diverse city that's trying to push for cosmopolitan policies. Is it working? I don't know. But the point yeah. But it's a highly global city and people have been pushing for as much as possible, highly global executive boards, highly global cities, highly global villages to try to increase this level of cross-cultural competency and cross-cultural awareness where you intentionally put people of different backgrounds together to try to help solve problems with many different perspectives. And I'm totally on board with that because I really think that's important. My only fear is that some people will be like, stop displacing me. And that's the only concern you might run into there. But yeah, that's very important. But I don't have a quick answer to tribalism aside from trying to, if you minimize your perspective that this is who I am, this is who I will always be, if you strip yourself of that mindset and go with an openness of like, what's your perspective? And really try to have that dialogue first and foremost, that's probably my current antidote. But yeah, I need to read and talk and learn and grow a lot more before I have a better.
Do is watch TV ads for politicians.
Oh
and
my
think that
goodness.
way.
Yeah.
Jeremy, could you end us in prayer?
I don't know. You want me to do it? I guess I'll throw
If-
something together.
If you feel both moved and competent.
If not, I'll
You go right ahead.
Dear Lord, thank you for the opportunity to hear Jeremy's words, to experience some of the world through his eyes. Help us to go forth to make our world a better place, to be ecologically and environmentally embracing, Lord. We ask this and lift up our congregation and all the families that are represented here. Amen.
Thank you, Zoomers. We're not present.